Hi, my name is Andy Schmuckler. My series I call A Better Human Story. Better because I believe it can be shown that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. I think I can demonstrate that with an evolutionary perspective on the story of our species. But talking right now about our particular manifestation of the problem that's arisen with civilization and a battle between democracy and fascism. One of the upcoming showdowns that is easily foreseeable is that the cases against Donald Trump for his illegal actions will be working their way up to the Supreme Court. I don't know how many of them are going to be that get there, but we know that Trump has been acting illegally and is losing at the lower levels. And that Trump never accepts defeat, whether it's an election or a court decision. So we know that when he loses, he appeals. So it's on its way to the Supreme Court. One imagines something just already just arrived there. So the question arises: what's the Supreme Court going to do in the face of really pretty blatant and widespread illegal activity by the president, transgressing the Constitution and violating laws relating to how people are dealt with in their, whether it's the Venezuelans with due process or the people they fire, just okay, all this stuff. But the courts are holding, people say. But then we got this Supreme Court. I mean, if we didn't know there was something special about this Supreme Court, it wouldn't be particularly interesting to ask, what's the court going to say? Oh, you would ask, well, is Trump going to obey the court when it finds against him? But this is a different court. When it comes to a fascist takeover, I don't think it's too much to say that the present condition of the Supreme Court is occupied territory by the force of fascism. They've been able to get majorities to do indefensible things, really. None more than their decision, which gave us Trump. If the Supreme Court had acted in this battle between Donald Trump and the rule of law that was going on around his attempt to overthrow the election, that attempt was on its way to being exposed in a trial as the most serious crime in American history, a series of crimes, a variety of crimes. And between the completely unnecessary delay, December of 2023, when they really should have rushed it through like with the Nixon tapes, because the public had this huge interest in having the trial conducted, and it was all ready to go in January. And Jack Smith asked the Supreme Court, skip the other lower levels like they did in 74 and just come out with a decision telling Trump, rejecting the bogus argument of presidential immunity. So not only do they give him 6 months, but they give him presidential immunity as a decision that was just out of this world with corruption. And basically, you can say, I think, with high probability, that the Supreme Court made it possible for Donald Trump to become president. And that amounts to saying the Supreme Court gave us this president and was acting in behalf of, assume, by the way that it came to pass that we got this 6-3 Republican appointed majority. This group has been groomed to serve certain interests. Exactly what those interests are, I think, can be traced through who's financed the Federalist Society and various things like that. But it's a plutocratic force. It's the corporatist force. It's fairly clearly a force that has some of its human components, the kind of people that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito took these expenses all paid for vacation trips with billionaires. Do I know that that's what's largely behind this? I think I pretty well do. And then there are other forces at work too. I don't know, for example, Amy Coney Barrett may not be a corporatist. I don't know enough about her. She seems like she might be the expression of a certain kind of moralistic Christianity that she has some background in. And I don't know if she's really connected with the same force that Clarence Thomas is. And John Roberts, I would say. They gave us Trump. And so one of the questions that the question we're asking here, what will the Supreme Court do? One of the questions I would have, and I don't know the answer to this, what did they think was going to happen with Trump? They seem to have decided that they were going to side with their criminal against the rule of law that was going to hold him accountable. That is disturbing enough to tell you that whatever the Supreme Court does, I don't think you can believe they're going to do it out of great moral principle. They sided with the criminal. They let him beat the rap. So many of us were waiting for Trump finally to be held accountable. It's amazing what he's been able to get away with. And the Supreme Court was one of the big stories in that. The final story, plus then he gets to be elected president and to kill open and shut cases against him that he managed to delay that long with the help of the Supreme Court. What were they expecting? They clearly were saying, we're going to help this guy in his effort to be elected president, to escape consequences for his crimes. How could they be thinking anything else? I mean, it was so clear he was guilty. It was clear what was going to come out at trial. Only it was going to be more than that. They could have started in January, even in the middle of the Republican primary. These terrible things would be exposed. What impact would that have had? Well, Trump seems to think it would have had enough impact that he would do anything to avoid having a trial. And now he never will. Did the Supreme Court, have they been surprised by what's happened now that he's been sworn in as president, thanks to them? Now, if this is what they wanted, then I'd say they're not going to hold him accountable. On the other hand, I think it's possible that they underestimated how crazy and destructive and compelled he is to act in ugly and destructive ways. They might think, like with the tariffs or something like that. He's got this economic theory and nobody can tell him better, even though that theory has been, pretty well pretty well destroyed for a couple centuries or more. Maybe they underestimated this guy's malignant narcissism. Maybe they're offended by the way he's weaponizing law enforcement. The one thing that we already got a good signal is that I think that if the president doesn't have to follow court orders, then what are the courts worth? And these guys didn't scratch their ways and sell their souls up to the bench to become irrelevant. They're sitting on the highest court in the land. And if courts are nothing because everything is just what the president says and it's a rubber stamp, what's the good of being a justice? So, I mean, we already saw it that when Trump came out with, I'm going to, this guy should be impeached because he's been fighting against me. John Roberts steps up. Hey, John, where you been? Well, he steps up and says, we don't talk about impeaching justices and this judges if we don't like the decision. That's not what we do. You appeal to a higher level. So he, at least, and we don't know about all the rest of them, looks like he doesn't want Trump trampling on the prestige of judges by making them one more object of his intimidation techniques. But whether the Roberts or any of the others will feel that this wanton illegality offends them in some way. I mean, they are lawyers after all. The law is supposed to mean something. You know, the courts in a place, I mean, I don't know, you know, courts in a dictatorship tend to be not independent powers, but instruments of the dictator. I don't know that this court will be willing to surrender to that lower status without a struggle. And I'm hoping that the sheer destructiveness of Trump is beyond what they had imagined and is not okay with them. And that leads back one more step about what will the Supreme Court do? And that is the question, if that court, or at least the majority of them, the people like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Alito and Roberts, and I still don't really know exactly who she is. If they are, as I suggested, basically groomed and promoted to be, especially seemed true with Gorsuch, to be the agent onto the Supreme Court of a particular power that's got to do, I would say the money power, but maybe that doesn't characterize the whole of it. But there's been a real concerted effort by a pretty coherent force to create this court. And whatever they exactly are, I believe that the people on the majority on this court are people who are selected for being fairly reliable to do what that interest would want done with the law. And they become really unrespectable in their way of contorting law and constitution and so-called history to lead to results that are favorable to one of the parties that's associated with this force that put them onto the the Supreme Court. And so then the question becomes, what would that force want to have happen? Would they want Trump reined in, tamed a little bit, to do the good things they want, like the big tax cut, and to stop doing X, Y, and Z that they consider counterproductive, like maybe the tariffs, or maybe threatening the Fed, or creating uncertainty in the economy? Were they expecting that? Uncertainty isn't good for the health of the economy. It just doesn't work very well with uncertainty. So I think the Supreme Court will do what the force that put them on the court, the majority, the Republican majority, Republican appointed majority, which is worse than just a Republican court, because I think is what they did with the Trump case, the immunity decision, tells me that they are wholly owned by one of the two embattled forces, which is why I call it occupied territory for fascism. Nonetheless, the interests of us Americans broadly, and the interests of this plutocratic, somewhat fascistic force may overlap enough in the case of Trump that we don't want this kind of recklessness. None of us do. I mean, he's destroying too much. Is this what the kind of thing the Koch brothers wanted? They wanted power to reside on the money side. Do they want everything getting broken at the same time? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And I hope that there's enough popular sentiment that takes to the street to get the court to think its interests lie in defending the rule of law, because otherwise there might be an uprising from the people against the court in some fashion down the line. Anyway, one thing I think is for sure, it will be an interesting piece of history to watch unfold. And I hope it proves to be heartening and not disheartening. I'm Andy Schmuckler. My website is abetterhumanstory.org. And there I try to assemble a coherent picture of the forces at work in human civilization, and to illuminate some things that I think are visible if we look at the human story more deeply in an evolutionary perspective. Creating a secular worldview is a work in progress. It's a fairly recent effort. A Better Human Story is my effort to contribute something that I think will help. For one thing, help the forces of democracy defeat fascism. And for another thing, I actually do believe this. I don't mean to sound grandiose, but I think it can also help human civilization to survive for the long haul on this planet, and to avoid an outcome that visibly does actually threaten us, that we will destroy ourselves. So we are playing at different levels a simple single game in which there are forces contending. The Supreme Court is not the force for the good that I wish it were, but it's what we got. And even if we get through Trump, this Supreme Court represents a serious problem that needs to be addressed in some way. As in so many ways, the liberal side sort of slept through really destructive transformation was taking place in the quality of conservative jurisprudence as represented on the Supreme Court, till we get to something like the immunity decision, which may be the most destructive thing that the Supreme Court has ever done. In the Dred Scott decision, 1857, they say the black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect, and creates what looks like possibly an open door for there being no such thing as a free state, because slave holders can take their slaves anywhere. So the question might arise: without that decision, might the Civil War have been avoided? I think it's an interesting question, and I bet there are people who have a good opinion about it. I've studied that era, but I don't know that I would venture an answer to that. But this one has given us the Trump presidency, and the impact on the United States and on the world of that act by the Supreme Court has contributed so much to the force of brokenness in the world, from the disorder they're creating around the Ukraine war to the possible dissolution of NATO, which is a positive thing in my opinion, to withdrawing from the effort to deal with climate change, all the way across the line. What a terrible thing they did. Will they do that again? And abet this dictator? Or will they block him because he's proved even more destructive than they imagined when they help him become president again? Thanks for listening.